Drugs is defined as a medicine or other substance which has a physiological effect when ingested or otherwise introduced into the body. But not only do substances have an effect on the users, but those around them. According to ourworldandData.org, drug use is directly and indirectly responsible for about 11.8 million deaths each year. Over 350,000 individuals die from overdoses each year. But how does addiction impact how we communicate with others? And how can we as a society decrease this growing drug epidemic?
It affected different groups of people pretty differently. I think because of what happened between myself and my parents, in terms of like them finding out about some of this stuff, they felt super betrayed. I didn't really expose them to much of it. I kind of like kept it pretty distant from that. But yeah, they felt betrayed, and it put a lot of distance between us, and they lost a lot of trust in me that really took a long time to build back. And there was like a lack of understanding that kind of grew there as well. They didn't know why I was doing it. They kind of let it reflect back on themselves as parents. My brother was similar. He was kind of, I didn't really care much if he saw me like smoking cigarettes and stuff, and he would always tell me to stop because it was gonna kill me, and I was like, that's funny, like just stop. Like I hear that all the time. The friend group that kind of like I went through all of this with in college, we got really tight. We looked out for each other a lot. I think there's a certain point in those friendships as well where they can become codependent on using as well, where I had friendships that on the surface looked really good and healthy, but if we decided to stop smoking weed, that friendship probably would have fallen apart. And I've experienced that. Having come out of that, a couple of my friends just won't text me anymore because they know that I don't want to do that, and they do that a lot, and they don't want to stop to spend time with me.
Debuting in 2019, Euphoria bases on high school drama and how drug addiction can tear away not only friendships but the family dynamics as well. Rue begins to use drugs when her father was on bed rest, taking Oxycontin and getting high alongside him. The show portrays how bad drug addiction can become and the ways it harms not only the drug user but their loved ones.
I think there's a couple different like reasons tied into why I quit. At a certain point, I looked at my life and I was in a spot where I had turned my back on God and religion and was like nearly ready to like say goodbye to all of that. At a certain point in a conversation with one of my friends, I kind of woke up to the fact that Jesus and his death on the cross and all the implications of that made my life worth something, and that those things were true, and that meant I'd had to respond in a certain way. That kind of gave me some of the first like spark of change in the way that I wanted to live. But even after that decision, like I was still addicted. I was still kind of like in that, and so what helped in that situation was actually waking up to some of the experiences that I had and looking at them and saying like, I nearly died a few times, and I nearly got arrested a few times, and like it was really by the skin of my teeth that I got out of those situations, and actually in like the moments of clarity, being able to say like, I don't like, I've got out of those situations, luckily. What? Who's to say that the next one I won't get out of it alive or not in jail? And that was a pretty sobering thought, combined with the kind of like faith revelation of coming back to God and deciding like my life is worth something because I belong to Jesus. The way that I really quit was I moved and decided to serve in mission in a different country here in Lansing in America, coming from Dublin in Ireland. That kind of like transplant of cutting the connections off was really helpful for me. I mean, I landed, and the last time I'd gotten high was 3 days before I got here, and that's part of my story, and I've never gone back other than nicotine. I would say nicotine and cocaine are two of the hardest things to quit that there is.
In adolescence, substance abuse can form toxic stress and violence. There are a multitude of negative effects of exposure to toxic stress that impact emotion and behavior. A visible sign is an increased desire to use drugs, which then alters the brain development and dopamine system of children and adolescents. Through this, adolescents exposed to drugs can grow not knowing how to control their behavior and emotions.
Wait, I'm calling the police. No, you can't. You can't do that. You will not attack me in my own home. I want your own home. I raised you.
I've seen drugs affect individuals in a pretty negative way. To me, it seems like drugs seem to make people more depressed and more self-isolated. And yeah, I just seen drugs really take people to bad places in their minds or in their life, or affect their family in ways that they wouldn't want them to. So yeah, that's kind of what I've noticed from people who use drugs.
Parents who abuse substances affect both their children and their own parents. If fortunate enough, grandparents will take their grandchildren in instead of putting them into foster care systems. Children will have to be taken care of for any temporary to permanent damage and other challenges done by the parents that expose their children to addiction.
It's an interesting question. I don't know if there seems to be a valid reason or a good reason to ever use drugs, but I can understand why some people would use drugs if they suffered abuse when they were younger, or maybe they're trying to cope with depression or cope with anxiety. So I think there are some valid reasons that I can see and understand why people use drugs, but I don't ever think that there would be necessarily a good reason to use drugs.
In October of 2020, I lost a close friend, Joy Yarrington, as she overdosed on fentanyl. I interviewed her sisters about seeing her battle addiction and how it affected them.
Well, definitely put a rift between our relationship, because I would have to start looking out for her, even though she's my older sister, and she did not like that at all. And she would start to resent me for trying to keep her accountable and help her out with anything.
It was very stressful for me having a sister who I knew was actively addicted to substances, because I just worried about her a lot, and I was always like wondering where she was, or if she was using at the moment, or like what kind of people she was with and everything. And it was really concerning for me, and I was just worried about her and her safety and her health.
Yeah, it just created like a kind of a barrier between us that wasn't there before. It also just had me worried for her all the time.
It's interesting because I guess, like, first off, I perceived them as just very, like, distant from my life, and, like, I don't know, it seemed like something that could never really, like, happen to somebody in my life, but I think I perceive them differently now, and just realizing, like, how much they actually affect the lives of people who use them and the lives of people around them.
Before, I was never like, I'm gonna do all the drugs, but I stay away from literally everything. Even something as small as weed scares me. So, or if anyone I know uses it, I get very worried about them.
Yeah, I read somewhere once that, like, drug use is the risk, it's an equal opportunity risk, so anybody can experience addiction, anybody can get into stuff like that, and so it just seems like a lot closer of an issue to me, and a lot more serious of an issue than I perceived it as before.
Yeah, you never think of how harmful they are until it like actually happens to somebody close to you, and I saw that happen twice to her, so.
Addiction is a battle between the individual and their self-control. Quitting can take time. It takes approximately 90 days for the brain to reset itself and lose dependency on drugs. What can we as a society do for those addicted to decrease the drug epidemic? The first thing we can do is show support. Growing out addiction is not easy, and the first thing they need is for someone to tell them that they are strong and there is someone there to support them. Do not let them fight on their own.